What's up, fellow historians? Welcome to the channel, Cartograph Forever. The world has a story, and we draw the map. You already seen the title to the video, so we just gonna get straight into it. Alright, so boom. Every country in South America speaks Spanish. Every single one except one. One country, 8.5 million square kilometers, 215 million people, and somehow, inexplicably, they all speak Portuguese. That's not an accident. That's a story. And it starts with the line drawn across the map before anyone ever seen that map. The year is 1492. Christopher Columbus has just sailed west on behalf of Spain and stumbled into the Caribbean. He comes back claiming he found a route to Asia, but he's wrong. But Spain don't know that yet. Portugal is furious. See, Portugal has spent decades building trade routes around Africa to reach Asia. They weren't doing this for fun. Spices, silk, and gold were the oil of the 15th century, and whoever controlled the sea routes controlled the world. They weren't about to let Spain waltz in and claim everything west of Europe. So both countries did what powerful countries do when they want something. They called the Pope. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI, who was himself Spanish, which is worth noting, issued a decree. He drew a vertical line about 560 kilometers west of the Cape Verde Islands. Everything west of the line, Spain. Everything east, Portugal. Portugal pushed back. The line was too far east. They wanted more ocean. So in 1494, Spain and Portugal sat down and negotiated the Treaty of Tordesillas. They moved the line further west, about 1,800 kilometers west of Cape Verde. Neither country had any idea what was on the other side of that line. They were dividing up a world they hadn't explored yet. Now, here's where Brazil enters. In 1500, a Portuguese explorer named Pedro Alvarez Cabral set sail for India, following the route around Africa that Vasco da Gama had just pioneered. But Cabral swung his fleet unusually far west into the Atlantic, possibly to avoid unfavorable winds, and on April 22nd, 1500, he hit land that nobody in Europe knew was there. He stumbled onto the eastern coast of what we now call Brazil, and when he checked his maps, specifically where the Tordesillas line was, this new land fell east of it. It was Portugal's. Cabral planted a cross, claimed it for the Portuguese crown, and sent the ship back to Lisbon. Brazil had just been discovered, and its fate had been decided by a line drawn on a map 6 years earlier. But landing somewhere and actually controlling it are two very different things. For the first 30 years, Portugal wasn't even that interested in Brazil. There was no gold, no silver, just Brazil wood, a red dyed tree that gave the territory its name. They traded it with the local Tupi peoples, set up a few ports, and moved on. It was only when the French started showing up, also interested in that Brazil wood, that Portugal realized they needed to actually settle the place or lose it. So in the 1530s, they carved Brazil into massive strips called capitanias and handed them to Portuguese nobles to colonize. Towns were built, sugar cane was planted, and with the sugar economy came something dark, the transatlantic slave trade, which brought millions of enslaved Africans to Brazil over the following centuries. As settlement expanded, Portuguese became the dominant language of administration, trade, religion, and education. The Catholic Church ran schools in Portuguese, laws were written in Portuguese, and the colonial elite spoke Portuguese. Now, the indigenous languages didn't disappear immediately. For a while, a Creole called Língua Geral, based on Tupi, was actually more widely spoken than Portuguese in some parts of Brazil. The Jesuits used it to spread Christianity. But in 1758, Portugal's chief minister, the Marquis of Pombal, banned Língua Geral entirely and made Portuguese the mandatory language of the colony. He wanted to bind Brazil more tightly to Portugal. Language was the tool. Brazil became independent from Portugal in 1822, and here's what's fascinating. Unlike most colonial independence movements, this one wasn't a revolution. It was the Portuguese royal family itself that declared independence. King Wow The sixth had moved the entire Portuguese royal court to Brazil in 1808, fleeing Napoleon's invasion of Lisbon. When he went back to Portugal in 1821, he left his son Pedro behind, and Pedro, rather than answer to Lisbon, declared Brazil independent and became Emperor Pedro I. So Brazil didn't break away from Portugal violently, it drifted away peacefully, which is part of why the language stayed intact, with no desire to shed it as a symbol of oppression. So why does Brazil speak Portuguese? Because a Pope drew a line, because a captain brought his ships too far west, because a treaty in 1494 handed the eastern part of South America to Portugal before anyone knew it existed, because sugarcane and colonization rooted a language into a continent, and because when independence finally came, there was no reason to let it go. A single line on a map, and 215 million people speak a different language than every single one of their neighbors. That's the power of geography. That's the power of history. And that is Cartograph Forever. If you learned something today, hit that like button and subscribe. Peace.